Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today. This webinar is intended for Outseer Fraud Manager on-premise customers and is titled Delivering Superior Results with Fraud Performance Diagnostics. Now, before I introduce our presenters, here are a few housekeeping notes. During the webinar, you'll be able to ask questions by typing those in chat. The chat is indicated by the question mark icon to your right. We will do our best to answer all questions at the end of the presentation. If we're unable to answer them during the webinar, we will follow up with you directly. After the webinar, you will receive an email with a link to the recorded webinar and the new Datos Insights report. So now, I'm happy to introduce and welcome our two speakers, Mark Harvey and Charlie Coleman. Mark Harvey is Outseer's Chief Customer Success Officer, with over 30 years experience of delivering professional services, education, and support to customers around the world. He has a track record of building high-performing, client-focused service teams in a range of organizations, including AT&T, Siebel, FIS, and Fiserv. Charlie Coleman is our Outseer Principal Fraud Advisor and a subject matter expert with over 25 years experience of creating fraud-fighting solutions and performing consultations to customers around the world. He has a track record of data analysis, product knowledge, and out-of-the-box guidance in a range of organizations, including Infocorp, FNBO, SunTrust, and Sterling Payment Technologies. Welcome to both of you. We will begin with you, Mark.
Thanks, Scott, and welcome, everybody. Now, before we start, I'd like you to think about something for me. We all know that the world of fraud is continually changing. Now, the question that I want to think about is your fraud manager solution keeping pace with those changes? Does it meet your current business needs? And how would you know? And this is something we want to look at today in today's session. Now, as Scott said, I'm Mark Harvey. I'm the Customer Success Officer here at Outseer, which makes me responsible for all of our post-sales services. And my team really focuses on onboarding new customers quickly and working with existing customers to optimize the value they get from the solution. So we're all about making you successful. And part of my team, Charlie, has a huge amount of experience in analyzing fraud detection performance and finding ways to improve it. What we'd like to do today is start by spending a little bit of time looking at the challenges that we face when we try to optimize fraud detection, and the approach my organization takes when we work with customers like yourselves. Charlie is then going to walk through some specific examples of how we do this assessment and some of the improvements that we can make. To illustrate those examples as we go through, we're going to show some screenshots from our new Fraud Manager on-premise diagnostic tool. This is something that I'll talk about in a minute, which makes the process of doing the analysis much easier and less intrusive than it was in the past. So that's our session for today. Okay, so let's start. Now, this is something I suspect will be familiar to most people on this call. We work with a lot of customers around the world, hundreds of organizations, and in our experience, the definition of optimized fraud performance, fraud detection performance varies significantly from organization to organization. There's no single definition of what good looks like. And most of you will be familiar with this idea of trying to find the balance between fraud detection and the experience that your end customer has. Putting it simply, fraud detection and preventing fraud is easy. You simply decline every transaction. Now, that's obviously not a great business model, and good luck explaining it to your business. Similarly, giving customers a really great low-friction experience during the transaction is also very easy. You simply accept every transaction. Great in the short term, but ultimately letting the fraud through is not great for you or your customers. So what we're talking about doing is finding that balance between how much fraud we detect and how intrusive we are, how much friction we put into the customer experience. And finding that balance will, as I say, vary significantly from organization to organization. It depends on your business priorities. It depends on the levels and type of fraud you experience. It depends on your experience, your appetite for fraud losses, for the regulations in your market, and for your market expectations. So the key is really finding your balance point, what good looks like for you and your organization. Okay, so we find the balance point. We know what good looks like for your organization, but unfortunately, that's not the end of the story. As I mentioned earlier, the fraud landscape keeps changing. Fraudsters innovate. They find new fraud methods all the time. Technology changes for your internal systems, for your customers, and the fraudsters. Your business priorities change. Maybe you're responding to regulation changes, or to budgets, or to economics, or to market expectations. And your team changes. People move on, new people join the team. All of this can make it really difficult to keep pace with the change. So it's not just about finding that balance point, it's actually maintaining it. And finding the balance point is one thing, maintaining it is actually more difficult. Okay, so we know we need to find the balance point, and we know we need to maintain it. So how do we do that? Well, when we work with customers, we typically see two different approaches to how they maintain this balance, or how they find and maintain this balance. The first is being reactive, responding to each change as it comes up. The second is being more proactive, which proactively assessing fraud performance and planning ahead. Now, reacting can be exhausting, and it tends to keep you behind the curve because you're only ever reacting to something that's already happening. Planning ahead delivers better results and is more predictable. So, for example, when you're planning your budgets, you've got information to work with, but it requires more upfront effort and planning. Now, there are times when you have to react. When you're in the middle of a fraud attack, or you're seeing new fraud attack patterns, you have to respond to those. So there is always a place for reacting to changes that are going on. But our advice is to be as proactive and methodical as you can be, and wherever possible, to get ahead of these changes, or at least keep pace with them. So when we work with organizations like yourselves, typically we take a pretty simple 4-step process. We start by understanding your specific objectives and priorities. So this is understanding your balance point, where you find that balance between the experience and the fraud detection. Then we collect data that truly reflects your performance of your solution. And this is important. This is finding data that is the genuine indications of how your system is performing, not some generic KPIs or generic results that don't add to the analysis. And that lets us do the analysis. It lets us get into the analysis of the information we have, and we bring with that our experience from a wide range of organizations and combine that with our data science and our research. And that's where we get the analysis to be able to really get deeply into what's causing issues, or where performance isn't optimal. And finally, we come up with specific actions that target improvements that meet your business priorities, not general recommendations or generic white papers, but very specific targeted actions that will help you. Now, most organizations plan this type of process, something like this, regularly, at least usually once or twice a year, to make sure that they are monitoring the performance of the solution, keeping pace with the changes that are going on around them. Okay, so that's the process we go through. Now, when we look at the solutions, so our customer solutions, what are we actually looking for? Now, every organization is different, as I said before, but we can find some common themes that let us create a baseline for our analysis, and lets us structure the way we go about assessing the performance. Typically, we'll start by understanding how the system is being used. So, for example, the event types and channels, and that gives us the scope for the rest of the assessment. We know which channels are being used, therefore we know where to look. Then we look at the health of the risk score that underpins the fraud detection. After that, we go on to look at the event interventions, and in particular, how the challenges are performing. And then finally move on to the fraud detection performance itself and the rules. And all of this gives us a structured way of working through the performance of the solution. And we work with our customers' teams so that during this process, we take what we find and discuss it with customers to understand where we need to focus and where we can look for potential improvements or issues. Now, in a few minutes, Charlie is going to walk through some very specific examples that we go through or that we've seen. Now, each of these examples is going to start with an objective, what we're looking for, then highlight some of the areas of data that we go through and the analysis we do, and end with some of the typical follow-on actions. And this really paints the picture of how we go through each of the things I was just talking about in the baseline. In the past, this analysis on Fraud Manager on-premise has been quite tricky because we've had to ask your teams to run scripts to collect data from your production environment. This is a pretty intrusive and time-consuming exercise for your team. However, with our new Fraud Manager on-premise diagnostic tool, we can now carry out the analysis using just the log files the system already produces. And the examples that Charlie's going to go through include screenshots taken from the tool, similar to the ones shown on the slide at the moment, to give you a sense of how this tool can use data already in the log files to get a deep level of analysis to go through this diagnostic process. Okay, so now I'd like to hand over to Charlie to take you through the examples. Charlie, over to you.
All right, thanks, Mark. As Mark mentioned, I'll go through a series of examples that help show some of the ways that we may review the available data to help you see the best results. Starting with this first example, at a high level, we may look at the data to get a better understanding of how our customers are using the system. To do that, we review the available data and look for patterns and anomalies. With this data, we can get an idea of what events and channels we're receiving, whether we receive only login transactions or other transactions like payments, deposits, change password. Are we seeing mobile app traffic or only web traffic? Are there other channel types being sent? In this specific example, we're looking at a week of data for a customer from different perspectives. From these charts, we can visualize the typical activity for a customer, what days might see more volume, what a typical pattern might look like. This high-level look may also shed light on whether a customer is experiencing a spike in volume, indicating that there may be a potential brute force attack or credential stuffing attack. Comparing patterns over several weeks, we might suggest rule changes to address a specific spike. And a takeaway to this example will lead to a better understanding of how the system's being used and where we might want to dig deeper to find potential issues. This can show that a rules review could be in order, or we may provide other options to expanding the use of Fraud Manager to receive missing data that would provide even better results. Intervening in the experience. In this example, it's very important to understand the amount of intervention that's being placed on our users. Are they being overly challenged? Are not challenged enough? This really is the entire premise of what we're trying to do. Stop the most fraud with the least amount of user annoyance. And as Mark mentioned previously, we need to find the balance between fraud detection, operational efficiency, and customer experience. There's a fine line between losing money and losing or angering your end users. And in today's world, most people are used to step-up authentication to complete their transactions, but it still comes down to a comfort level of detecting fraud at the expense of making it harder for the real user to complete what they came here to complete, or even declining the transactions altogether. Some of our out-here customers have very little comfort for impacting users, or have a small staff that's ready to answer the phone, so they really can't handle having too much intervention. And other out-here customers have a much higher tolerance level and are really more focused on stopping the actual fraud losses. So it really comes down to your comfort level. This obviously is a personal, professional decision and is a big factor in deciding how aggressive you may want to be with the rules or scoring. It can also give you real-world expectations of how much fraud you can expect to detect. Understanding a customer's goals, comfort levels, resource availabilities, and compliance requirements is essential to providing the best solutions and suggestions. And in these charts, we may find that users are being overly impacted for certain channels or events, or not challenged enough and fraud is getting through. The data may expose events that we really don't see pushback at all, and fraud is allowed to get through untouched. From this review, we may conclude that there are more options to consider for challenge methods, or that a more aggressive stance is needed if challenge methods are being passed by the fraudsters. The data might also help to manage the resources that are needed to deal with the user complaints or assistance that you might see. So we might conclude that a rules review is the best option for either adjusting rules or changing strategies. Is the risk score reliable? The heart of the fraud manager solution is related to our risk scoring engine. For it to provide world-class results, we need to make sure first scores are being distributed correctly. This is done through a purely mathematical process called normalization. Normalization looks at volumes from different channels and events over a 7-day period to get an idea of what today might bring. Basically, we're trying to prepare for the day that's yet to happen based on what we know over the past 7 days. This process distributes risk scores so that most of the traffic sees the lowest risk scores, and the highest risk scores are reserved for the transactions that stand out the most. This will only allow you to create rules that exclude a majority of users and focuses only on the few that really seem to be the most suspicious. If a combination of org, channel, event, and sub-event have a good amount of weekly volume, usually around 4,000 transactions a week, then we should see very good score distribution, and it's highly likely that we'll have other indicators to look at, like device identification or amounts, if we do not have that kind of good volume and it's lower than the 4,000 transactions per week. One thing to note, since each combination gets its own normalization, we may see different risk scores for logins than we do for payments, even from the same session. It's more about where the individual event falls into place compared to other similar events. So logins compared to logins, payments compared to payments. This is actually done for a good reason. If everything was just combined together and we didn't compare events to each other, we would see the most suspicious events take up the highest risk scores. So basically, change password would always get the highest scores, where maybe your logins would, or other events would never get high scores. So that's why each individual event has its own normalization. This approach allows us to show the most suspicious payments out of all payments, or the most suspicious logins out of all logins. From this suggestion, from this review of data, we may suggest an implementation review to see where the score distribution is off and what we can do about it. This may also drive the need for a rules review, where we can look at the rules for lower volume combinations that may not see the risk score to be as reliable, and find some other factors that maybe we can use instead. Are challenges effective? If we're using a challenge method as a form of step-up authentication, we expect it to do what's intended by keeping the bad guys out but letting the real users through. To make sure we're seeing the most optimal results from available challenge methods, we want to review to make sure fraudsters are not passing authentications and real users are able to get their attempts through and not being denied by failing step-up authentications. In today's world, certain information can literally be looked up on the internet. So some of the questions and challenge methods that we used to use in the past may be too easy for a fraudster to simply look up. Once they get by the challenge, they can change the contact methods to themselves. They can change the passwords to settings that they know and the real user doesn't. To this end, we may find certain questions or certain challenge methods may need to be revisited to make sure they're doing the best job. Today, we're also seeing a lot of social engineering type of fraud, where the fraudsters are actually brazen enough to contact the real user and trick them into committing fraud against themselves, basically. This is obviously very hard to detect because most of the data we see shows that it is from the real user, and these are therefore not fraud. So a review of the data may reveal that either different challenge methods may be required, or a different tact altogether, where maybe you flat out deny transactions from what appears to be a real user, but coming with certain characteristics. On other occasions, some people just get tired of being challenged and they give up and don't feel like cooperating with the request. So obviously this can lead to unhappy users, excessive calls to the help desk, and other issues. To help combat these scenarios, we recommend maybe an implementation review to verify that the challenge methods are actually working properly and aren't out of line. We may also suggest, again, a rules review to focus on the type of fraud that is bypassing challenges and offer suggestions for rules that may better combat these losses. Is fraud detection effective? The main goal of fraud detection or fraud manager is to assist you in detecting fraud and stopping it from continuing. The risk score plays a major role in this, but the rules that you put in place are just as important, if not more important. The example that we see here shows some of the high-level data we might want to review, from risk score distribution to what rules are triggering on fraud, and even the risk score ranges seen for fraud. All of this data in combination gives us a hint at any areas we might want to dig a little deeper into. For example, understanding that the fraud lies in the risk score ranges may show that rules you have right now set to a risk score level of 985 to 1,000 are literally just missing fraud that is scoring 984. So obviously this may help us to direct you to update rules, expand risk score ranges, and see the best results. Obviously, one of the most important factors is knowing where the fraud is and understanding how well everything is working. This obviously is greatly driven by the feedback that your teams provide by working cases and marking fraud. This fraud marking feeds the risk engine and the valuable knowledge to build fraud patterns, to focus risk scores in the right places, and to alert us to devices, IP addresses that may be involved with fraud. In this example, you can see two different scenarios where one example in the top right is seeing good case marking and allowing risk scores to adjust to the feedback that's being received. And you actually see some value there. In the bottom right example, we're basically receiving no feedback. This means the risk engine is having to use more generic observations, doesn't know when it's right or wrong, or if any certain patterns exist. It also means that you really can't tell how well the solution's working because there's nothing really to see or to go off of. Based on this, we might provide some education or even statistical data showing just how important case marking is in the whole process. We may also suggest a feedback review to verify that we're receiving good and accurate feedback where all the potential fraud is being marked and not just the original login. Many times we see other transactions clearly come from the same IP address or device or ISP. Getting that additional information can clearly help to give you the best risk scores. And then finally, we might suggest a rules review to find those areas where maybe just a few small adjustments to rules might increase your results by a good amount. How the rules are performing. Continuing the concept that I just discussed, basically the rules are the most important piece of the fraud puzzle. If you put in no rules, you detect no fraud. And if you put in poor rules, obviously you'll detect fraud poorly. So having efficient rules that do not over impact users, but are focused on the right scores and other factors will produce a more well-oiled machine that sees you detecting more fraud while still minimizing the friction you're causing for real users. A review of the data can show that rules performing well, which rules are just causing noise, not effective. We may find that there are certain rules that literally we can just get rid of and make way for better rules or more aggressive rules. And we can still deal with the intervention, by reducing the intervention with new rules that we might want to put in place. Maybe the data can also direct us to look at out-of-the-box kind of thinking, and instead of just having a few generic rules, we might find that we should consider some more creative sensors or concepts to provide the best results. An example of this might be to better understand something as simple as the maximum risk score in the last 30 days. It might have been very high in the past 30 days, but the current risk score is not. So this may allow for us to be more aggressive and go down into the lower current risk score ranges by using that knowledge of having that last 30 days maximum risk score to help be more aggressive with your rules. This type of discussion may drive us to, again, a potential rules review or maybe even a standalone study that's focused on certain fraud patterns, or performing a champion and challenger study to see what scores and what sensors provide the best results. Can we add rules? Finally, in the same vein, we may suggest adding rules to meet your fraud detection goals. As mentioned before, we suggest different concepts or rule logic that is not currently being used. We can also tap into the knowledge of other Outseer customers that may be seeing the same fraud patterns and have successfully put rules in place to deal with it. Chances are, if you're seeing a certain fraud pattern, you're not alone. In this example, we see someone found a sensor that stands out when there's a value of Y and when fraud is present. So with this type of knowledge, we could probably create a rule that is going after a more focused and more stubborn or hard to detect fraud. Combining the data and the knowledge of other customers may be just the ticket to helping you achieve your goals. To this end, we may perform, again, a rules review or maybe a decision tree study where we can provide options that provide the best results. This type of fine tuning can assist you in making room for other fraud fighting concepts or even consistent proven results as a result. I'll conclude by saying we look forward to having a deeper discussion with each of you to see how our services and expertise may help you to realize the best results. Mark, I'll hand the reins back over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. Okay, so to wrap up the session for today, we started by talking about the need to find the balance point for your business. So what good looks like for your particular business, and the even greater challenge of maintaining that balance over time. I talked about how we work with our customers and organizations like yourselves to help them be more successful by being proactive and methodical rather than reacting to the latest change. And then Charlie has gone through some pretty detailed examples, and in particular showing how our new Fraud Monitor on-premise diagnostic tool really helps us get at the information and the true performance of the system in a way that's considerably less intrusive for your team, for us to collect the data and to analyze it. Now, there's a lot more detail, as you can imagine, than we can cover in 30 minutes, but I hope this introduction was useful. As Charlie says, we're more than happy to work with any of you separately to explore specific challenges or how we can help you with anything in your business. Okay, thank you very much for the time today. Now back to Scott for any questions.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it. And we do have a couple questions that have come through. The first question is, how long does a diagnostic typically take?
Yeah, that's usually the first question we get. Typically, this type of diagnostic will take about 4 elapsed weeks. It's somewhat dependent on getting access to the data in the first place, but then how available our customers' resources are. We can do a lot of the analysis or the introduction to the analysis from the logs back at base. But then, as I mentioned, what we do is bring back the analysis we find and work with the customers team to focus in on areas that are important. So it's typically around 4 weeks when you factor in getting people available and getting people onto calls to discuss what we're finding.
Great. Thanks for that. Second question is, so as a customer, what would I need to do?
Charlie, you can take that one.
Yeah, thanks. Typically, when I work with a customer, the only thing that you'll really need to provide us is the log data. And from there, we can really take it from there. I might take some time to not only get the log data from you, but maybe to sit down and have a discussion of what kind of issues you're facing, what goals you have in mind. And then from there, literally, it's going through the data and driving where the data tells us to go. And then obviously communicating that back to you and providing maybe some suggestions and a presentation and those kind of things to give you what we believe is the best results for you.
Great. Thanks, Charlie. That's all the questions that we've received in the chat so far, but what I would encourage everybody to do is that if you didn't want to ask the question live here on the webinar, that you do follow up. I do want to end on a couple slides here, which is other resources that you can find that can give you more information about performance diagnostics and the services that we have here at Outseer. I would encourage you to register for an upcoming webinar in January that's focused in on unmasking mule money, money mule operations. We have a solutions brief that's available All of these are going to be linked through this webinar so that you can download these, as well as encourage you to request a consultation so that if you want to find out more about how you can optimize your own implementation of Fraud Manager, that you connect with us and we can have a conversation about what are the best approaches for you to improve your solution, improve the performance of your Fraud Manager through the ways that Mark and Charlie just shared with everybody. So with that, I definitely appreciate everybody's time and attention today. I definitely appreciate Mark and Charlie for their expertise. And with that, we'll wrap it up and hope to see you at one of our upcoming webinars as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ray.